Before we dive in, drop a quick hi in the comments. It may seem small, but trust me, it really helps YouTube share this story with more sci-fi fans like us. I'd love to see who's watching.
Dr. Sandra Moore died before her body hit the floor. The discharge burst from the interior wall of the chamber without warning, a violent white arc that crossed the distance between Sci-Fi Rock and the scaffold platform in less than a second and threw her backward hard enough to bend the railing behind her. One moment she had been standing beside the survey equipment, arguing with a technician about power fluctuations in the lower excavation grid, and the next she was airborne in a spray of sparks and blood, while every system inside Chamber 4 detonated into alarm noise simultaneously. Someone screamed her name. The containment shutters began descending from the ceiling. Dr. Keith O'Brien barely remembered crossing the platform. He reached her seconds later and dropped to his knees beside her body. Sandra's chest was gone beneath ruptured armor and dark arterial blood. It spread rapidly across the black stone floor, while overhead the emergency systems repeated containment instructions in a calm, synthetic voice that made the entire chamber feel suddenly unreal. Medical team is 3 minutes out. Seal the lower platforms. Kill power to the excavation grid. Voices collided across the chamber without coherence. Technicians moved between consoles, while red emergency lights pulsed against the vast interior walls of Sci-Fi Rock, turning the black surfaces around them into shifting planes of crimson shadow. Stop shouting and stabilize the translation arrays. The voice cut through the chamber cleanly enough that several technicians obeyed before they consciously registered who had spoken. Dr. Helena Dreyfus was already moving across the lower platform toward the primary console bank, one hand dragging a fallen diagnostic case upright as she passed it without breaking stride. The red emergency lighting flashed across the sharp angles of her face and the dark pressure suit beneath her lab coat, now streaked with dust and someone else's blood. Keep every system recording, she said. I don't care what overload warnings you're seeing unless the chamber is physically on fire. A technician near the western console looked up shakily. Doctor, the containment systems are trying to force a full shutdown. Override them. That violates excavation protocol. Dreyfus reached the console and keyed past 3 warning screens without looking at them. So does first contact? O'Brien looked up once toward the structure towering above the excavation site. Even after 14 months inside the desert beneath Orc 10, Sci-Fi Rock still refused to feel fully comprehensible to the people studying it. It rose through the center of the chamber, like a piece of architecture built according to principles human geometry only partially understood. Immense black surfaces curving upward into impossible symmetry, interrupted by streams of white symbols moving beneath the material like light trapped under dark water. Humanity knew what it probably was: a gateway, a transit mechanism, technology capable of opening passages beyond mapped space. What humanity did not know was how to make it function. And until now, the structure had never reacted to them at all. Sandra, O'Brien said, pressing both hands against the wound, despite already understanding the damage was catastrophic. Stay with me. The alarms continued. Blood spread slowly outward beneath her body, across the smooth floor of the chamber, until it touched the inner wall of Sci-Fi Rock itself. Everything shut off instantly. The alarms died mid-cycle. The emergency lights vanished. The entire chamber fell into absolute silence so suddenly that several people froze in place from the shock of it alone. O'Brien looked down. The blood against the wall was disappearing. Not draining. Absorbed. The black surface of Sci-Fi Rock drew the liquid inward, molecule by molecule, until nothing remained except polished stone, reflecting the darkness around it. Then the symbols inside the walls changed. White light erupted through the chamber, The entire structure came alive at once. Patterns raced beneath the black surfaces in vast cascading waves, while every dormant section of the excavation chamber activated simultaneously. Consoles overloaded. Translation systems rebooted without command input. Power surged through circuits that had remained inactive for over a year of study. Someone whispered, "Oh my God." O'Brien stood slowly. The black surface separated into layers of shifting geometric segments, moving with impossible precision. So advanced, it no longer resembled machinery at all. White light gathered between the opening structures, folding inward repeatedly until a figure began taking shape inside it. Humanoid. Near to it. Tall and luminous beneath flowing white robes, composed of moving geometric patterns that shifted continuously across the surface like living mathematics. Its face possessed the broad symmetry of a human face, while remaining subtly wrong in proportion, as though the system had constructed the image from incomplete biological assumptions. The figure looked at them. Then it spoke in accented but perfectly understandable English. "Genetic profile accepted." Nobody in the chamber moved. "Previously unregistered civilization confirmed." O'Brien became aware of his own heartbeat. "Transit evaluation protocol initiated." Silence followed. Not the silence of confusion. The silence that comes when reality changes, shape faster than the human mind can reorganize itself around the new version. Because in that moment, every scientist inside Chamber 4 understood the same thing simultaneously. Sithar Rock had never been dormant. It had been waiting for them to touch it back. The figure remained motionless above the chamber floor, while the light composing it continued shifting in slow geometric currents beneath the surface of the robes. No visible mechanism supported the projection. It simply existed there in the center of the chamber, as though the air itself had accepted instructions from something older than physics, as humanity understood it. Nobody spoke. Dr. O'Brien became aware that every person in Chamber 4 was looking at the same impossible thing, while trying, with varying degrees of success, not to visibly panic in front of it. The figure's gaze moved across the room, not scanning, assessing. When it spoke again, the voice carried the same unnatural precision as before, heavily accented, each word fractionally separated from the next, as though the language itself was being assembled in real time. Biological integration has completed first contact protocol. The white symbols moving beneath the chamber walls accelerated. Civilization identified. Human. A pause followed. Not hesitation. Processing. Classification status. Non-network species. Dr. Dreyfus stared at the projection for 2 full seconds before speaking. "How are you translating this language?" Several heads turned toward her, not because of the question itself, because it was the first question anyone had asked that assumed the thing in front of them was real. The Custodian turned toward her immediately. Cognitive synchronization occurred during biological integration. Dreyfus's expression tightened slightly. "You mapped human neural language architecture from genetic contact." "Partial correction," the Custodian replied. "Genetic confirmation initiated access. Cognitive mapping completed through environmental synchronization." Around the chamber, several translation processors abruptly began spitting corrupted character strings faster than their systems could parse them. Several translation systems around the chamber began printing streams of corrupted symbols across their displays faster than the processors could stabilize them. O'Brien barely noticed. His entire attention remained fixed on the thing floating inside the chamber near Sandra Moore's body. "What are you?" he asked. The figure turned toward him immediately. "Custodian Interface 7. I am the active mediation construct assigned to this transit structure. Nobody moved. Somewhere behind O'Brien, one of the technicians whispered, "Jesus Christ." The Custodian continued, as though no interruption had occurred. Sci-Fi Rock is one node within the transit network established during the 7th expansion period. The white light around the figure shifted again. For unregistered civilizations, activation requires biological confirmation, cognitive mapping, and civilizational evaluation before network access is granted. O'Brien stared at it. "You're evaluating us." "Correct." The answer came without emotion. For developing civilizations, unrestricted transit access produces extinction probabilities above acceptable threshold values. The room remained completely silent now. Not because the scientists lacked questions, because every answer was making the situation larger, faster than anyone inside the chamber could mentally contain it. O'Brien felt his eyes drift briefly toward Sandra, his body on the floor before forcing himself to look back at the projection. "How many evaluations?" "3. The word appeared instantly. "Successful completion grants provisional network access and monitored expansion privileges." Privileges. The term sounded less like diplomacy than administration. "And if we fail?" O'Brien asked. For the first time, the Custodian did not answer immediately. The symbols beneath the chamber walls pulsed once in synchronized white light. Then, failed civilizations remain isolated. A technician near the western console found his voice first. "Isolated how?" The projection looked toward him. "Transit denial, observation status, containment protocols if required." Nobody asked what containment meant. Nobody in the chamber wanted the answer badly enough to hear it spoken aloud. The Custodian raised one luminous hand. A field of white geometric light unfolded above the chamber floor, between the scientists and the projection. At first the patterns appeared abstract. Then the shapes stabilized into a star map unlike anything in human navigation records. Entire regions of space flickered across the projection, marked by symbols no one recognized. One sector pulsed red. Evaluation Sequence 1 will begin in 2 standard planetary cycles. The highlighted region expanded. A non-network gravitational destabilization event is in progress within this sector. The projection shifted again, displaying impossible tidal distortions tearing through an entire stellar region. "Your civilization will be observed during response conditions." O'Brien frowned. "You want us to stop it?" The Custodian's expression did not change, because it did not truly possess one to begin with. "The evaluation concerns what your species becomes while attempting to do so." The chamber fell silent again. The command center beneath Orc 10 had grown quieter since the war ended, though not quieter enough for anyone inside it to mistake the silence for peace. Sheridan was reviewing reconstruction projections for the Northern Fortress network when the priority channel from the Sci-Fi Rock excavation site opened across the right side of his display without warning. Not a scheduled transmission, emergency override. That alone made him straighten slightly in his chair. The excavation teams had spent 14 months sending reports that varied between cautiously optimistic and scientifically incomprehensible, but they had never once triggered military override authority. Until now. The transmission resolved into the face of Dr. Helena Dreyfus, Xenophysics Division, lead coordination authority for the Sci-Fi Rock research site after the previous director transferred off. Dr. Dreyfus had spent most of the war rebuilding governments that no longer trusted each other enough to share oxygen without legal oversight. Brilliant, relentless, and notoriously difficult to rattle, she had once delivered evacuation directives during a kinetic strike without raising her voice above conversational volume. Now, Framed by the pulsing red emergency lights of Chamber 4, she looked like someone forcing herself to remain upright through sheer discipline. "Admiral," she said, "we have a situation." Sheridan set aside the reconstruction report spread across his desk. "What kind of situation?" Dreyfus glanced briefly off-screen. Behind her, technicians crossed the excavation platform in hurried bursts, while containment shutters hung half-lowered across the chamber. The lighting strobed over black stone and drifting smoke. "We experienced an activation event approximately 7 minutes ago during lower interface analysis," she said carefully. "There was an equipment discharge, one fatality." A casualty notation appeared automatically beside the transmission feed. Sheridan read the name once. "Cause? We're still determining that." Dreyfus drew a measured breath. "But the structure appears to have reacted to direct biological contact." Sheridan held her gaze for a moment. "Human DNA." "Yes?" No hesitation. No attempt to soften it. Somewhere behind her, streams of white symbols moved beneath the surface of Sithar rock, like veins of light under dark ice. Sheridan had spent months looking at those walls without seeing so much as a flicker. Now the entire structure was alive. "What exactly activated?" Dreyfus looked back toward the chamber, as though part of her still expected the answer to change if she checked again. "The whole system." Sheridan rose from his chair. "Explain." Dreyfus gave a faint, humorless exhale. "It identified us." Sheridan said nothing, but Dreyfus watched his attention sharpen. "We have an active interface construct communicating through the structure. It calls itself Custodian Interface 7. According to the translation systems, Sithar Rock is part of a transit network built by an unknown civilization." No one in the command center reacted outwardly, though Sheridan could almost feel the political architecture of known space shifting beneath the sentence. "How many people know?" "Everyone inside Chamber 4. My senior staff. We also had automated relay bleed before we isolated the network." "How much bleed?" "We don't know yet." That answer concerned him more than the activation itself. Secrets were manageable. Uncontrolled information was not. "How secure is the site?" Dreyfus understood immediately what he meant. "We locked external communications immediately," she said. "Nothing has left the excavation network since then." Sheridan moved toward the central tactical display, already thinking several steps ahead. If word spread before Orc-10 established control of the narrative, every major government in mapped space would move on the system at once. Intelligence agencies, corporate blocs, surviving wartime alliances, all of them. And if the Rinders learned humanity had activated a precursor structure immediately after the war, he cut the thought off before it finished forming. "Can this construct communicate in real time?" "Yes." "Can it access external systems?" "We don't believe so." Sheridan filed the wording away. "Restrict the construct to full isolation immediately. Nobody enters or leaves Chamber 4 without military authorization. I want every system inside that excavation reviewed for outbound transmission capability, whether you think it exists or not." Dreyfus nodded, then stopped herself before ending the transmission. "There's something else." Sheridan looked back toward her. "The construct says this is only the beginning," she said quietly. "According to it, humanity is being evaluated." The red emergency lighting rolled across the chamber behind her, throwing shifting shadows over the black surface of Sithar rock. Sheridan met her eyes. "Evaluated for what?" She paused, choosing the next words with visible care. "Access." The chamber felt different with the Custodian present. Not threatening exactly. But the air inside Chamber 4 carried a quality that had not existed before the activation event. A subtle pressure at the edge of perception, like the moment before a storm, when the atmosphere has already decided what it is going to do. And the only question remaining is how much of it you are going to survive. The white symbols moving beneath the black walls of Sithar rock ran faster than they had in the days since activation, cascading through the stone in patterns that the translation systems could partially parse and mostly couldn't, producing corrupted character strings that Dreyfus's team had stopped trying to clean up and started archiving instead on the grounds that incomprehensible data was still data. The Custodian stood above the chamber floor in its projection of luminous geometric robes and looked at the 7 people assembled below it with the specific quality of attention that had nothing human in it, despite the human shape it wore. Sheridan stood at the front of the group. Behind him, Dreyfus had a recording device running. Beside her, O'Brien held a data pad he had stopped writing on 10 minutes ago. The 4 Marines stood in a loose formation to the left, not fully at attention, not relaxed either, holding the rigid stillness of trained soldiers facing something they did not understand. Evaluation Sequence 1 will now be assigned, the Custodian said. Its voice carried the same unnatural spacing between words as before, each one delivered with careful precision that sounded constructed rather than natural. Listening to it required slightly more attention than normal speech. The destination sector contains surviving builder infrastructure operating beyond original design parameters. Autonomous modification cycles have continued for approximately 11,000 standard years without oversight or correction. Local spacetime has been restructured by accumulated transit system evolution to a degree incompatible with conventional biological navigation or survival modeling. Nobody in the assembled group moved. The evaluation will assess civilizational function under conditions of environmental instability beyond designed tolerance. No instructions will be provided during the evaluation period, observation only. O'Brien spoke without raising his hand. How long will the evaluation last? The Custodian turned toward him with the immediate precision it always used when addressing a direct question. Duration is determined by evaluation completion, not elapsed time. When sufficient data has been collected, extraction will occur. And if we can't function in there, Sheridan said, extraction will still occur. A pause of approximately 2 seconds. Evaluation outcome will reflect accordingly. Sheridan absorbed this without visible reaction. 1 vessel, the Custodian continued. Transference is instantaneous. The passage will open when your team is aboard and closes upon transit completion. You will not navigate to the sector. You will arrive. It raised one luminous hand. The floor of Chamber 4, the black stone between the assembled group and the base of Sithar rock, filled with a geometric field of white light expanding outward in precise concentric patterns until it reached the chamber walls. Inside the field, an image formed, a projection of the transit passage itself, a region of space where light bent in impossible directions and distant stars shifted position from one moment to the next, as though geometry inside the corridor could not fully stabilize within normal perception. Transference will initiate upon vessel readiness confirmation, the Custodian said. It lowered its hand. The projected passage remained glowing across the chamber floor. The network will observe, it said. Begin. The vessel was called the Ardent, a mid-weight research and operations craft reinforced for hostile environment work during the war, carrying enough power generation for extended independent operation and enough structural integrity that Sheridan had felt comfortable putting 7 people aboard it for a mission whose parameters included the phrase local spacetime has been restructured. The transference took no time at all. One moment, the Ardent sat inside the main launch bay beneath Orc 10's western command sector, its systems running final checks, while Sheridan stood at the forward console, watching the readiness indicators cycle green. The next moment, the launch bay was gone, and the sector was there, filling every external sensor array simultaneously with data that immediately began contradicting itself. Navigation is reading 3 different positions, the pilot said. Vasek had been transferred from the orbital defense wing after the war and spoke with the calm of someone who had spent months flying through Orc-10 storm systems. All 3 are updating in real time. None of them match. Which one feels right? Sheridan said. Vasek looked at him briefly. Sir. Which position feels right when you look out the forward port? He looked up from the navigation console at the viewport. Outside, the sector spread in every direction, vast and wrong, the stars occupying positions that the navigation system insisted were impossible, while simultaneously insisting on 3 mutually exclusive sets of impossible positions. But visually, looking at it directly, there was a quality to the light in one direction that was different from the others, harder to name than to see. That way, Vasek said, pointing. Then go that way. The automated guidance system objected immediately, producing a cascading series of conflict warnings as 3 simultaneous position readings tried to generate 3 simultaneous course corrections for a vessel that could only move in one direction at a time. Sheridan reached across the console and disabled the automated guidance without ceremony. Vasek took manual control and flew the direction the light felt right, and the Ardent moved into the sector on human instinct, because human instinct was the only navigational instrument that had not already failed. Within 20 minutes, the rest of the automated systems followed. Predictive combat modeling collapsed first when the local physics stopped providing consistent input data for the probability engines to work with. Sensor arrays began returning readings that contradicted each other across simultaneous scans. The same object at 2 different distances, a gravitational source with no detectable mass, a section of space registering as both traversable and structurally collapsed, depending on which array was querying it. The communication system developed a lag that varied between 2 seconds and 40 minutes on transmissions sent across distances of less than a kilometer, which made coordinated decision-making through standard channels effectively useless. Sheridan pulled his 4 Marines, O'Brien and Dreyfus, into the forward compartment and gave them 30 seconds of his attention. Nothing aboard this vessel is going to work the way it was built to work, he said. That includes command structure. I am not going to be able to give orders fast enough for them to be useful in conditions that are changing faster than orders can travel. You are going to make decisions. You are going to make them based on what you can directly observe, not on what any system aboard this ship is telling you. If something looks wrong, it probably is. If something looks survivable, find a way to survive it. He paused. Questions? Nobody had questions. They split into operational pairs and distributed through the vessel, and the Ardent continued deeper into the sector on Vasek's instincts and the judgment of 7 people who had stopped waiting for their equipment to tell them what to do. Dreyfus noticed it 40 minutes in. She had been running manual observations from the secondary science console, writing longhand in a physical notebook because the digital logging system was producing time-stamp corruptions that made the data unreliable. When the pattern became visible, not in the data itself, but in the space between the data points. The sector was not behaving randomly. Random instability would produce an even distribution of anomalies across all observable variables. What she was seeing instead was clustered. The gravitational fluctuations intensified along vectors that corresponded to the Ardent's movement patterns. The time dilation fields appeared most aggressively in regions where the ship had spent the most operational time. The spatial reconstruction events were heaviest in areas where the crew had made their most significant adaptive decisions. She crossed to where Sheridan was working with 2 of the Marines on a manual power rerouting problem and interrupted without preamble. The environment is responding to us, she said. Sheridan looked up from the conduit junction he was holding manually closed while a Marine secured the bypass. Explain. The instability is not uniform. It clusters around our behavior, our movement, our energy output, our decision patterns. The sector is modifying itself in response to what we do. She held up the notebook. I have been tracking it for 40 minutes. The correlation is not marginal. Sheridan held her gaze for a moment. It's studying us, while we survive inside it. Yes. Sheridan looked at the conduit junction, then back at Dreyfus. Does knowing that change what we do? It changes what we show it, she said. We stop trying to solve the sector. We start functioning inside it the way we actually function. Adaptive, decentralized, improvised. We show it what we are when the conditions stop cooperating. We've been doing that for 40 minutes. Then we keep doing it better. She went back to the science console and kept writing. The sector responded by generating a gravitational fluctuation along the Ardent's port side that shifted the apparent mass of the vessel by 30% for 11 seconds before correcting. The structural compensation required 4 people working 3 separate manual systems simultaneously, without any of them being able to communicate through standard channels. They did it anyway, reading each other through the physical feedback of the systems they were working and the spatial awareness that came from operating in close quarters under sustained pressure. The Custodian, wherever it was, observed all of it. The gravitational collapse event came 90 minutes into the evaluation without any precursor signature that the Ardent's degraded sensor suite could have detected in time. A section of local space approximately 200 meters off the starboard bow underwent a sudden restructuring event, builder infrastructure autonomously reconfiguring according to directives 11,000 years old and no longer calibrated for the presence of biological vessels, and the mass displacement it generated struck the Ardent's starboard hull in a wave that the structural integrity systems had less than a second to respond to before the physical force arrived. The hull held. The interior didn't. The starboard secondary corridor took the worst of the structural compression, and the Marine working the manual power relay junction at the corridor's midpoint was caught between a collapsing support strut and the bulkhead behind him before he could clear the junction. The sound of it reached the forward compartment before the damage reports did. O'Brien got there first because he was already in the adjacent corridor. He found the Marine on the deck with the strut partially across his lower torso and the kind of wound that in any previous century of human warfare would have already decided the outcome. Deep. Structural. The body doing everything it could with what remained of its circulatory integrity, while that integrity continued diminishing at a rate that had a clear mathematical conclusion. O'Brien had the ointment kit open before he finished assessing. His hands moved with urgency, driven by the memory of watching Sandra Moore die before the ointment could have made any difference, and refusing to lose another person that way. He spread the formula carefully across the wound. The bleeding stopped. The tissue began closing. The infection probability collapsed to something the Marine's own immune system could manage until surgery became available. The Marine looked up at him from the deck with the specific expression of someone who has been on the wrong side of a wound assessment and is recalibrating their expectations in real time. "You're not dying today," O'Brien said, already applying the secondary layer. "But you are going to be extremely annoyed about the next several weeks." 2 other Marines arrived and secured the strut and got their colleague stable and positioned while O'Brien monitored the ointment's progress, and Sheridan appeared at the corridor entrance and assessed the situation in approximately 4 seconds. "Can we survive another restructuring event?" Sheridan said. O'Brien glanced at the wounded Marine. "If the ship does." The lights flickered. For half a second, the bridge screens doubled. One of the Marines near the hatch appeared in 2 different positions before reality snapped back into place. Vasek's voice came across the comm. "Sir, you need to see this." The forward viewport filled with drifting builder wreckage surrounding a massive gravitational distortion. Broken black structures rotated through warped space, while stars bent around them in slow spirals. One corridor remained open through the center. "Navigation's failing," Vasek said. "Everything's desyncing." A debris fragment ahead flickered suddenly closer. Dreyfus looked at the telemetry. "Time dilation." Another flicker crossed the bridge. The tactical officer moved before the rest of his body caught up. Sheridan looked at the distortion field, then at his crew. "Hold your positions," he said. "Trust the last confirmed movement. Pilot flies. Everyone else keeps the ship alive." Vasek pushed the Ardent forward. The debris field swallowed them immediately. Automated systems died within seconds. Gravity rolled unpredictably through the hull. Debris drifted past at impossible angles, while crew members flickered in and out of temporal alignment, badly enough that nobody trusted their own eyes anymore. Vasek kept flying manually. Engineering kept rerouting power fast enough to stop the ship from tearing itself apart. Ahead, a wall of rotating wreckage collapsed across the corridor. "No path through," Vasek said. Dreyfus stared at the distortion patterns another second. "Wait." The debris shifted, not collapsing. Opening. A gap appeared for less than 2 seconds. Sheridan saw it immediately. Now. Vasek drove the Ardent straight through. Hull alarms screamed. Metal shrieked across the outer plating. Then, silence. The distortion vanished. Normal space returned. 30 seconds later, the passage opened ahead of them. White geometric light unfolded across space. Chamber 4 materialized around the Ardent. The Custodian stood waiting. "Evaluation sequence 1 concluded," it said. The white symbols beneath the chamber walls pulsed once. "Classification revised." It did not say to what. It did not explain what the revision meant for what came next. It simply stood in its geometric robes above the chamber floor and regarded them with the procedural attention of a system that had just collected data. It had not expected to collect, and was already integrating it into whatever calculation came next. Sheridan looked at it for a long moment. Then he turned to the Marine team lead. "Get him to medical. Now." They moved. O'Brien was the last one off the vessel. He stood at the bottom of the ramp and looked at the Custodian across the chamber. "People could have died in there," O'Brien said. The Custodian looked at him. "The evaluation concerns what your species becomes under conditions of maximum pressure," it said. "Observation requires conditions." O'Brien held its gaze for a moment. Then he walked away. Behind him, the Custodian remained suspended above the chamber floor, while white symbols continued cascading slowly beneath the black walls of Scythar Rock. The energy signature from Scythar Rock's first activation had been visible from orbit. Sheridan had known within hours of the Ardent's return. 2 separate governments filed formal inquiries through diplomatic channels within 48 hours. Their sensor logs attached with the precision of organizations that want you to understand. They already know something before they ask you to confirm it. One military command repositioned assets toward the Orc-10 system without explanation. The structure had announced itself to half of known space, and there was no version of containment that addressed sensor logs existing independently across sovereign systems he did not control. He was 6 days into managing the pressure when the Custodian interrupted a strategic briefing. Not through a channel. Not through any system anyone had configured for the purpose. The white light came through the corridor walls directly, and the projection stabilized above the briefing table before the 2 government liaisons present had finished reacting to it. Sheridan raised one hand. The liaison who had been about to speak stopped. "Evaluation sequence 2 will now be assigned," the Custodian said. "Transit instability scales with biological mass. Personnel count for this evaluation is restricted to functional minimum. The evaluation requires integration of compatible cognitive interfaces from a second confirmed species. Rinder harmonic neurological architecture has been identified as complementary to human adaptive cognition. It produced a star map that had to rescale itself twice to fit the distance into a comprehensible frame. The daedalum will serve as the evaluation environment. Preparation time is limited. It looked at Sheridan directly. Then it was gone. The briefing room stayed silent for a moment. Sheridan reached forward and terminated the liaison channels himself before either government representative could start speaking again. Then he looked at the star map, then at his communications officer. "Get me Chancellor Den." Orath Cell arrived 24 hours later under emergency diplomatic authorization personally signed by Den, with a small staff and no ceremony, which told Sheridan that Den had understood the situation well enough to strip it of everything that would slow it down. He walked off the diplomatic vessel into the underground receiving bay and looked at the human facility around him with the careful attention of a being cataloging an environment. Then he looked at the man waiting for him at the bottom of the ramp. Commander Yael Drast looked back. The silence between them had the density of two people recognizing each other from a context neither had chosen and neither had forgotten. Drast had held Sector 9 against an assault Orath Cell had ordered. The mathematics of that engagement existed between them as a fact that no shared evaluation could simply overwrite. Orath Cell spoke first. "Commander Drast." "Fleet Commander." Drast's voice was flat, not hostile, the flatness of a man choosing precision over warmth because precision was honest. "Welcome to Orc 10. "I have been here before, as a prisoner," Orath Cell said. "I know," Drast said. "I was there." A pause. Short. "Then we understand each other," Orath Cell said. "We understand the situation," Drast said. "Whether we understand each other remains to be established." Orath Cell looked at him for a moment. "That is acceptable." Drast turned and walked toward the briefing corridor. Orath Cell followed. The daedalum arrived without transition. One moment, Chamber 4. The next, a space so vast and structurally wrong that the human visual system spent several seconds trying to apply architectural logic before giving up. The entry point was on a transit platform, suspended inside a central atrium, whose dimensions appeared to change depending on which direction you observed them from. Above and below, and in every lateral direction, the structure continued, corridors assembling from geometric components in real time, transit bridges unfolding across open voids before collapsing back into scaffolding, entire sections reshaping through autonomous construction processes running without oversight for longer than most human civilizations had existed. The platform shuddered. The first structural shift hit from below, gravity transitioning without consistent source mass, the floor tilting in a direction that briefly stopped being down. 3 Marines caught the railing. Drast had already moved to the center of the platform, where there was nothing to catch and nothing to fall against. Orath Cell had stepped back from the edge before the shudder arrived. Drast noticed this immediately. You felt it coming. The harmonic signature changed 4 seconds before the transition, Orath Cell said. The structure broadcasts distortion patterns before executing them. Our instruments did not detect them. But you did, Drast said. Yes. Drast made the calculation instantly. Then you're on point. You tell me what's coming, and I'll tell you what to do about it. Orath Cell's expression carried something that was not quite disagreement. That arrangement assumes your responses will be appropriate. They'll be fast, Drast said. We can argue about appropriate later. Orath Cell's pupils widened slightly. Movement, he said. The second shift hit immediately afterward. A corridor to their left sealed itself as a defensive platform emerged from the wall, extending articulated geometric limbs toward the group with the precision of a system that had classified them as destabilizing biological interference. Drast was already moving. East Passage. The Marines moved without the words needing to travel through formal command channels. He watched the platform track them, looked at the geometric scaffolding assembling along the upper atrium wall above it, and spoke without looking at Orath's cell. "Something's shifting up there. When it does, tell me which direction." Orath's cell's pupils contracted. "Left. Severe. 2 seconds." Drast waited 1 second and moved left hard. The scaffolding section came apart in a gravity transition that sent construction material through the platform's primary articulation housing before its targeting system finished adjusting. The platform stopped. Orath's cell looked at the wreckage, then at Drast. "Effective," he said, apparently having reached a conclusion. "East Passage," Drast said, and they moved. The daedalum escalated. Roots that worked once became lethal minutes later. Defensive systems began coordinating across sections. Gravity transitions arrived faster, and from directions the team had not yet encountered. Drast responded by stopping doing anything twice. Different routes, different methods, different solutions to the same problem each time it recurred. The Marines operated with the decentralized cohesion Orc-10 had forced into them over 8 years of war. Conditions changed too fast for centralized command to survive intact, so they made decisions at the point of contact and reported them afterward. On Orc-10, improvisation had stopped being deviation from doctrine long ago. It was the doctrine. Orath's cell provided what their instruments could not. Harmonic warnings arrived seconds before each transition, each defensive response, each structural reconfiguration. Enough time for Drast's people to turn the environment's own movements into weapons. A corridor collapsing became a barrier between the team and a pursuing platform. A gravity inversion became a tool rather than a hazard. The structure kept changing. They kept changing faster. They clashed twice. Once over a route where Orath's cell's harmonic reading indicated imminent collapse, and Drast assessed it as survivable and tactically useful. Drast was right, though Orath's cell did not say so immediately. Then over a Rinder team member caught in a gravity inversion who received assistance from human Marines faster than anyone had coordinated. A moment of cultural friction that resolved itself the way such friction always resolves inside an environment, actively trying to kill everyone present. Dreyfus found Drast during a 20-second static period in a sealed maintenance corridor. "It's learning us specifically," she said. "Not random escalation. The complexity increases in direct response to our adaptation rate. Every successful tactic generates a more difficult version of the same problem." Drast processed this as tactical information. So the better we do, the worse it gets. Until we reach whatever the evaluation is actually measuring. Something shifted in his expression. Not resignation. The opposite. "Good." He looked at the Marines. "Stop doing anything twice. If it worked once, assume it won't work again." The daedalum got harder. They got faster. The rate held. Then the transit spine collapsed without the warning that had preceded every previous structural event. A coordinated defensive response hit 3 sections at once. The main corridor sealed at both ends, while construction systems began disassembling the floor beneath them. They cleared the spine with 11 seconds before the final section came down. The silence afterward was different from shock. The breathless recalibration of people who have just discovered that something they were not sure would work actually worked. Orath's cell looked at Drast. Drast looked back. "East," Drast said. "Yes," Orath's cell said. They moved toward the interior. The central transit nexus was the first space inside the daedalum that felt intentionally built for biological presence. Not comfortable, but stable. Consistent gravity, geometry that did not reshape itself while occupied, walls carrying the same white symbols as Sci-Fi rock, moving with a slower, deliberate rhythm. None of them assumed they had reached the end of the evaluation. The Daedalum had changed too often for that. Then they saw the Custodian waiting in the center of the Nexus. Evaluation Sequence 2 concluded, it said. The combined team stood in the Nexus with the posture of people who had been operating at maximum capacity and had not yet received permission from their own nervous systems to stop. Both species demonstrated compatible adaptive cognition under escalating instability. Integrated survival probability exceeded network projection parameters. A pause that carried a different quality than its processing pauses. Most civilizations presented with integration conditions prioritize internal preservation over collaborative adaptation when survival probability decreases below critical threshold. Both species present did not. Dreyfus asked. She always did. How many civilizations have passed this evaluation? The Custodian looked at her. Few. The word carried everything it implied about the ones that had not. Classification of both civilizations revised upward. Preparation for evaluation. Sequence 3 will follow transference. It raised its hand. The passage opened. But the Custodian did not immediately send them back. It looked at the assembled personnel for several seconds longer than any previous interaction had required. Then it sent them back. Chamber 4. Recycled underground air. The black walls of Sci-Fi rock and their endless symbols. Drast and Orath cell stood 2 meters apart. Not the loaded 2 meters of the receiving bay. A different distance between people who had not resolved their history, but had established, through the specific medium of surviving something together, that the history was not the only thing between them anymore. Orath cell looked at Drast. Your tactic with the scaffolding, in the first atrium. Yes. I have been trying to determine whether it was calculated or instinctive. Drast considered this. Does it matter? Orath cell was quiet for 3 seconds. No, he said. I suppose it does not. Somewhere inside the network, the information was updated, and the calculation it had been running for 11,000 years continued. The third evaluation had not been announced. But it was coming. The transmissions had been arriving for 6 hours before Sheridan stopped reading them. Not because they stopped coming, because they had stopped containing anything he did not already know. Governments fracturing along predictable lines. Military commands demanding representation at Sci-Fi rock. Religious coalitions issuing statements about the nature of the human soul with a confidence that suggested they had access to information nobody else did. The political architecture of known space was coming apart at the joints, and every transmission said so in slightly different language, and none of them changed what was happening 400 meters underground in Chamber 4. He set the last one aside and looked at the Custodian. For the first time since activation, it was simply telling them something. The builders did not disappear, it said. They evolved beyond the limitations of biological civilization. Mortality, isolated cognition, linear perception, planetary dependence. At a specific point in their development, these limitations became incompatible with continued expansion. They transitioned into a distributed state, integrated directly into the transit network. Not immortal, not incorporeal in the way younger civilizations imagine. Simply no longer confined to biological form. Dreyfus was recording everything. She had been recording since the moment the Custodian's opening changed register, and she understood that what was happening was different from everything that had preceded it. The network was left behind for one purpose, the Custodian continued. to identify species capable of surviving the same transformation without psychological, social, or ecological collapse during the process. The evaluations were never measuring military strength or technological advancement. They were measuring adaptive potential under conditions of escalating existential instability. Sheridan looked at it steadily. And now? Now the evaluation is complete. The Custodian raised one luminous hand, and the star map that unfolded above the chamber floor was larger than anything it had previously shown them. Not a sector, not a region, but the full scope of the network itself. Hundreds of nodes connected across distances that made the scale of the war for Orc 10 look like a dispute over a single room in a very large building. Humanity and the Rinders have demonstrated adaptive potential sufficient for the next stage. The offer is now extended. It described the transformation with the same procedural neutrality it had used for every evaluation announcement. Expanded cognition, the ability to process information across scales that biological neural architecture could not sustain. Radically extended lifespan, direct transit interface capability, meaning movement through the network without vessels, without technology, through intention and biological integration alone. Partial cognitive merger with network systems, access to accumulated builder knowledge spanning 11,000 years of observation across hundreds of civilizations. The advantages were real. Sheridan understood that immediately and completely. He was a man who had spent his career making assessments, and the assessment here was not complicated. The offer was genuine, the capabilities were extraordinary, and any civilization that accepted would become something that civilizations currently operating on biological limitations could not meaningfully compete with. But he also understood the cost before the Custodian finished stating it. Identity remains, the Custodian said. Humanity as humanity currently understands itself does not. Orath Sel, who had been standing with his hands folded inside his gold robes, spoke for the first time since it began. I cannot answer for my civilization, he said. This decision exceeds the authority of a fleet commander. My High Commander must be present. The Custodian looked at him. The evaluation concerns species representatives with direct operational experience of the network conditions. I understand what the evaluation concerns, Orath Sel said. I am telling you what Rainder honor requires. These are not the same thing, and I will not pretend otherwise. A silence followed. Then the Custodian said, Transference for additional personnel can be arranged. Sheridan was already reaching for the communications relay. High Commander Sora Den arrived 4 hours later. He came without ceremony and without staff, which had become characteristic of Sora Den since his return from the Black Site on Dura Ven. Months of imprisonment had stripped away everything unnecessary from his bearing. The ceremony was gone. The authority remained. He walked into Chamber 4 in deep purple robes and looked directly at the Custodian. The Custodian restated the offer in full. Den listened without interrupting. When it finished, he asked 3 questions in the flat, precise manner that Sheridan had come to recognize as the Rinder method of establishing whether an interlocutor was operating in good faith or managing them toward a predetermined conclusion. The Custodian answered all 3 directly. Den was quiet for a moment after that. He looked at Orath Sel, who returned the look with the specific quality of a subordinate who has already reached a conclusion and is waiting to learn whether his commander will arrive at the same place independently. Then he looked at Sheridan. You have already decided, Den said. It was not a question. I've been deciding since it started talking, Sheridan said. The argument that followed never became heated. Sheridan would remember that more than anything else. The most important conversation of his life unfolded without anyone raising their voice. Dreyfus spoke first. You cannot understand refusal, she said to the Custodian. To the builders, remaining biological became equivalent to choosing extinction. From inside that logic, your offer looks like pure benefit, because the cost stopped being visible to the people who made the choice. She looked directly at it. But we can still see the cost. Biological limitation produces suffering, the Custodian replied. The transformation resolves these conditions. By replacing the beings experiencing them, Dreyfus said. That is not the same thing. Sheridan spoke next. The evaluations tested whether we could adapt under impossible conditions. We passed because we stayed functional without surrendering what we were. He held the Custodian's gaze. You're offering evolution. What you're not offering is the right to decide what that evolution means for ourselves. The Custodian remained silent. Orath Sel unfolded his hands from inside his robes. A Rinder who accepts transformation by inevitability has not evolved, he said. He has surrendered responsibility for what he chooses. Every oath I have sworn requires that I remain the being who swore it. Then Den spoke. The Rinder people did not survive the 100-Day War by becoming something beyond harm, he said quietly. We survived it by remaining ourselves under conditions designed to break us. He looked at the Custodian. We refuse, not because we fear change, because the choice must remain ours. The Custodian stood silent in the center of Chamber 4. Beneath the black walls of Sethar rock, the white symbols slowed until each one became individually visible. When it finally spoke again, something in its voice had changed. The decision is accepted. The chamber remained still. The final evaluation was not whether you would evolve, the Custodian said. It was whether you would choose your own evolution. Both species have demonstrated the capacity to refuse a predetermined outcome in favor of self-determined continuity. A pause. This was one of the acceptable outcomes, the Custodian said. It was also the rarest. The star map above the chamber floor changed. Every node in the network lit simultaneously. Hundreds of transit points across regions, with no names in any human or Rinder navigational system. Passages opened between them in cascading sequence as the full network came online for the first time since the builders had left it behind. The map kept expanding. The network was open. Not for transcendence, for transit, for exploration, for whatever humanity and the Rinders chose to make of it. Still mortal, still divided, still themselves. Den looked at Sheridan. Still holding the planet? Sheridan almost smiled. Still holding it. Den inclined his head in the Rinder gesture that stood somewhere between acknowledgement and respect, then turned and left Chamber 4. Somewhere beyond the reach of the transit network, something noticed the activation. The network opening was not unusual. That had happened before, across other civilizations and other cycles of evaluation. The refusal was different. Two species had been offered transcendence and declined it with full understanding of what the choice meant. They had chosen mortality, uncertainty, and the right to shape their own future, rather than accept one already determined for them. For the first time in a very long while, something ancient turned its attention back toward the younger civilizations moving through the network. Then the observation ended, and the silence beyond mapped space remained what it had always been.
Hey there, space human. I'm really curious about your thoughts on this video. Drop a quick comment and let me know what's on your mind. Or just say hi if you prefer. Either way, I'd love to hear from you. Also, remember to check the pinned comment. Trust me, it's worth a look. Oh, and one last thing. I've chosen another video for you to watch. Just click the card here, or here if you want the whole playlist. See you there.